We're giving out 1 million books. I can't even count to 1 million. The second piece of this program takes the science of reading and puts it into usable resources to help students read and read well.
My name is Emily Coppola and I work for the American Federation of Teachers, and on behalf of all of us here, we are very glad to have you for today's webinar. And I'm particularly excited about today because this is the first in a series of literacy webinars for our Reading Opens the World initiative. And so we hope that you will come back. We're going to be here a lot of Thursdays at 6, so please keep an eye on your email and register and tell your friends and tell your colleagues to join us so we can all see this great content together. So I'm really excited that today we're here with Susan and Melissa, and they are both AFT PD national trainers. So they are experts at this content and they are going to take us through it today. So I'll give it to you, ladies.
Thank you so much, Emily. Can you hear me?
I can hear you,
Great.
Yes.
Excellent. All right, so going to our first slide. And we have a...
Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Kelly Booz, and I'm the director of...
Okay, well, we are thrilled that you could join us this afternoon. As you can see, we're just getting things together, and maybe you've had that day or that week yourself. So our session today is on literacy and ELLs. It's tips and resources and strategies for individualized instruction. I guarantee you will leave with many, many ideas and maybe more than you bargained for, but that's okay because you will get resources that you will be able to leave with, the slide deck, and we have a resource sheet as well with information and links for you. So I want to share that this webinar information is based on work from Project ELLITE, E-L-I-T-E, and that was developed by Dr. Diane August and her research and research findings from the National Research Council of the National Academies. Now, Project ELLITE, an acronym like we have so many when we use with English learners, that stands for Expanding Literacy Instruction by Tutoring English Learners. And if you are an AFT member and would like to learn more about PD on this and other topics relating to literacy and English language learners, we ask that you contact Lisa Dickinson, and we have an email, a name, and an email. I'm going to try to pop this in the chat and see if that works here. If not, if someone can help bring that over, that would be great. And I will remind you again of this contact information at the end of the session. So we're here on Project Methods. Let me just give you a little bit of background on this. This slide does describe the methods that are used in Project ELLITE to support ELLs and the project goals, Project ELLITE goals. First and foremost, these methods are evidence-based, and that means that the research has been shown to produce better outcomes in students, which of course is what we're looking for, particularly English learners, as compared with students whose teachers did not use these methods. The project goals themselves include improvements in instructional methods used and stronger language and literacy development for ELLs, which is why we're here. Now, we have a poll question, hoping that people have joined us by now and have settled in. And our poll question is very simply, which best describes your primary role in education? So we're looking for the primary role, the role where you spend most of your time. And give you a moment to do this, see how many people are responding. As you see, we've got the pre-K elementary teacher versus secondary teacher. We separated those. Looking at an ENL, MLL, ESL, however you use that term, express that term in your area. Bilingual teacher also included. A support specialist, which may include reading, literacy, special education, a coach, a teacher on special assignment, an administrator, maybe has some administrators in the room, or other if we didn't manage to find a role that identified with you. And my partner in crime here, Melissa, is my tech-savvy person who's going to, when we're ready, show us those results. Okay, we're going to show the results here. We've had a good number respond, and look at that. It looks like it's a pretty close race. I mean, if I was a betting person, I'd feel like a winner either way, but it's great to see the majority, and not by much, are pre-K elementary teachers, excellent, but secondary teachers, you're not too far behind. And then right after the pre-K elementary teachers, we have a lot of English language learner, multilingual learner, ESL, bilingual teachers, and support specialists. And we threw a lot in the support specialists, so interesting to see that. And we have some administrators here, welcome. So we hope you take some information back and share these with the educators in your buildings. And then I'm sorry, we missed about 14% of you. We're not quite sure what your role is, but you're important. So if you want to type it in the chat, we'd love to see it if we missed that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And again, we want to say it's nice to see so many of you here. Do we have a total number here? I'd love to know a total number. If anybody can let us know how many people we have here. And thank you so much for responding. Thanks for taking the time to be 172. That's amazing. And we hope maybe more of you will join. But thank you for taking taking any of this time out of your busy day. We know how crazy it is right now in schools. So looking at our next slide, we're going to go right into what we're looking at.
Good evening, everyone. So as Susan said, I know that we're so busy with school, but I know over here in the East Coast, I'm coming to you from Little, Rhode Island. We are prepping for a big storm on Friday, so I know some of you are doing that as well. So thank you for joining us this evening. So as Susan mentioned, we will be talking about tips, strategies, and resources, and we are going to start with some reading routines. And what we would like to do is talk to you about literacy instruction for ELL students, and really for all students. As we look at these routines and strategies, you'll notice that you can use these one-on-one with students in a tutorial type fashion, in small groups within your settings, whether it's in the classroom or in whatever setting you particularly work in, or in whole classes as well. So we're going to start to look at these routines that happen before, during, and after to support our literacy. So let's start with routines typically used before reading. So why would we do that? What's the purpose of before reading routines? And the purpose is really to activate prior knowledge so that we know, what do our students already know? What types of gaps might we need to fill in? Before reading routines also serve a purpose to motivate our students. They motivate them to read. They tap into things that they may be interested in. Before reading routines also help to identify a purpose for our kids. They're clear so kids know what they're reading and possibly why they're reading that. And it's also a place where you can pre-teach difficult concepts. That might be content itself, or it actually may be vocabulary, anything that is going to help reading comprehension. So these are all things and purposes of what we would do prior to getting into a reading, getting into a text. So now that we know the why behind it, here are a couple of strategies that you may be familiar with. But as Susan mentioned, as we go through these routines, we will give you a ton of strategies, but also resources at the end so that you can really look a little bit more in depth into these strategies that might work best for you. So anticipation guides, great before reading routine. These are used to activate prior knowledge and really build curiosity for our readers. Again, they can be done individually, partners, in groups, and they can really serve multiple purposes. They can help students anticipate. They can help us do a type of formative assessment for what do our kids already know. And these can be done orally, they can be in a written format, they can be as simple as sentence starters like, I think that blank, if blank happened to me. So you may already be using anticipation guides, or I know for myself, sometimes I hear a strategy and say, oh, I haven't done that in a while. So I might look back, and thanks to the internet, we can find so many different samples of that. I know a lot of us have heard about a KWL chart. You may have also heard about a KWHL chart. So tapping into what do we know, what do we want to know, and then the H is how will I find that out, and then what I learned at the end. So you can see that type of strategy actually is a before reading and also an after reading. A problem solution chart is also another strategy, similar to 2-column notes that you may have or may not have used before. And we're going to look at what these strategies may look like within a text and then give you some additional ones in a couple of moments. So let's take a look at this. Using the text of The Wizard of Oz, we can look at this reading routine of summarizing a text for students. This is particularly helpful if the text or the content may be difficult, if the vocabulary is difficult or maybe not common vocabulary, if there's a lot of academic language in the text. What you might want to do is summarize what students are about to read before they actually dive into the text. And as you can see here, pictures are always a great resource. Whenever we can add pictures and videos, graphics, it helps comprehension for our English language learners and really for all of our students. Another before reading routine is considering chunking out materials. That strategy of chunk and chew is a strategy that can really be a before and a during reading routine. But thinking back to that prior slide, looking at the cyclone, which may or may not be a familiar word to your students, and diving deep into the vocabulary and chunking out the text prior to students actually getting involved in it. So as we use The Wizard of Oz as an example, we know that The Wizard of Oz text itself may be difficult if that is something students are reading. So we can think about ahead of time, how do we chunk that information? How do we give them opportunities to chew on that information and really look at it, look at the vocabulary words, make connections so that when they dive into the actual authentic text, they'll have that background information. Another before reading routine, as I mentioned previously, is really looking at the language that may, be difficult for students to comprehend. So if they're reading something and they keep talking about cyclones over and over in that particular text that we're using as an example, if students have never experienced, they don't know what that means, we can do some pre-work before reading. We can show pictures, we can show videos. Videos are another great tool for our English language learners where we can add closed caption, We can slow down the rate of the video to help our students, and we can even use their first language to really help to support the comprehension. So these are a couple of examples of before reading routines. We wanted to show you what that might look like in a text. We happen to be using The Wizard of Oz as an example. And this last slide gives you even more before reading routines, additional strategies that you may or may not be familiar with. And again, you'll have a lot of resources at the end where you can dive deeper into them. So brainstorming, something you can do before we get into the reading of a text. SQ3R, maybe something that you are familiar with. It may be a new something for you. That's when you survey, when you read the title and you help the reader look at introduction. What do you think the title is meaning? It's really when you start to predict. It's where you can look at bold-faced headings and subtitles, and you can help create those into questions for students. The 3R is where you can recite, can help with reciting, reviewing, and reading the material. So there are some very specific strategies that you could look at for before reading routines. And there are also things like making predictions where you can embed oral language into that. You can use pictures for that. Questioning, graphic organizers, true-false statements. There are, a plethora of before reading routines, and we have more for you in the resource document. So before we go into looking at during reading routines, we wanted to hear from you. And we are interested to hear any of the strategies that you just heard. Have you used them? Have you had success with them? Is there something you'd like to add? I know Susan and I always feel whenever we're in professional development, we learn so much from each other. Experts in the field, and with 100+ attendees, I know that we can get a lot more information from each other. So we'd like to give you a moment in the chat. List any strategies that you've heard tonight that you've had success with, but also please fill in any additional resources that you particularly like or have had success with, because I know I always will be writing them down when I'm in a PD and research a little bit longer. So thank you. I see them really coming in. So take a look at the chat. Give you a minute to add to that. They're coming in so fast, I can't keep up. So we encourage you, as we continue to look at during and after reading strategies, to please continue to use the chat so that we can share with each other and pull out some even additional information. So thank you for participating in that, and please continue to utilize that chat. I'm going to pass it back to Susan, and she's going to talk about during reading routines. Susan?
Melissa, I have to agree with you. The experts are not necessarily the people talking. They're the practitioners that are using these on a daily basis, and their experiences are so valuable. And while they don't have an opportunity to talk, the chat is the way for them to share out their information, their ideas, their experiences. I'm sure we have people in the group that are brand new teachers and veteran teachers, and that exchange of information is just so worth the 1 hour that you're putting in here. All right, so I get to talk about during reading routines. And these are frequently used as they are ways to engage students with the text. That's what we want to do, is get students to work with it, dig in. And these activities will typically help students to organize information that they have gleaned from the text and to construct meaning based on what they understood. These routines are so valuable with ELLs, as it's the opportunity for them to demonstrate to teachers what they understood and what they didn't understand. And then that helps the teacher think of, okay, what am I going to do next? If they didn't understand, how will I add to that and get that comprehension going for students? Now, reading comes alive when we recognize how the ideas in a text connect to our experiences and our beliefs, right? That's where it connects for us. So events happening in the larger world, our understanding of history, and our knowledge of other texts, all of that together really adds the text-to-text, text-to-self, and text-to-world strategy. That will help students develop the habit of making these connections as they read. And that's what we're looking for, are those connections. It also allows teachers to make lessons more culturally responsive and reflective of the students who are in their classes. So Say Something is a wonderful way to get students to interact verbally. With your partner, you would decide who would talk first. So between me and Melissa, perhaps it's me. I'm going to say something. And then her response would be, she would then respond to me so she could make a prediction, ask a question, she could clarify something, make a comment, make a connection. And if she's unable to do that, then that's a trigger for her to go back and reread that segment. And again, we want to get ELLs involved. We want to get them talking and listening. We don't want them on the outside, because this is the way they will acquire language, they will practice, they will connect with their peers as well. So having them involved in it is so critical. Syntax surgery, that's a strategy where students perform surgery-like techniques. Kind of think of the game Operation. And syntax are the way words are arranged or structured in a sentence. What happens with syntax surgery, it's used to analyze, disassemble, and regroup a sentence to its proper format. And that helps students understand the relationships between different elements in a sentence and to see clear connections and form a clear meaning. So this strategy is very useful when one encounters a sentence that's difficult for an ELL. So that's another strategy they can use. Text tagging, that's getting more working with highlighters, markers, colors, so marking information, rather like annotating and making it visibly organized in that sense. And then Melissa had talked about the chunk and chew already. So I know we don't have time to go over each of these. We're giving you more strategies than we could possibly talk about. And then moving on to our next slide. And again, back to the Wizard of Oz. We're going to get onto that cyclone, get into the house, and go back over. Interactive reading and QARs, those are question-answer relationships. Those are examples of a during reading routine, and this gives you an idea of how to take that text with an illustration to provide more comprehension. And we have some annotated text where the words are defined in context. So if there is where students don't understand something, there's the opportunity to be clarified. And then there's comprehension questions. So with an interactive reading or QAR, you would read a short passage aloud to students. You have these predetermined questions, such what's listed here, that you'll ask after you stop reading. And then you read the questions aloud to students and model how you decide which type of question you've been asked to answer. And then you show students how to find the information to answer those questions. Now, there are 4 types of questions in a QAR. They're right there questions that are literal questions, and the answers are right there in the text. Often the words used in the questions are the same words found in the text. Then there's the next level. Those are the think and search questions. So answers are gathered from several different parts of the text. They're not all together, but they're put together by the student to make meaning. So that's also explicit questions. The author and you could be a combination of both explicit and/or implicit questions, and that's based on information provided in the text, but the student is required to relate it to their own experience. And although the answer doesn't lie directly in the text, the student must have read it in order to answer the question. Now, on my own questions, they are implicit questions. They don't require the student to have read the passage, but he or she must use their own background or prior knowledge to answer the question. So in the example of The Wizard of Oz, what is a cyclone? And what does Uncle Henry mean by "I'll go look after the stock"? We have different types of questions there. And then what do you think the author meant when he said, "One glance told her of the danger"? So you can see the different levels of the right there, think and search, author and you. And moving on to the next one. All right, so we've got some additional during reading routines, some additional strategies for you. Reciprocal teaching refers to an instructional activity in which students become the teacher in small group reading sessions. So the teacher would model and then help students learn to guide group discussions using summarizing, question generating, clarifying, and predicting. And once students have learned the strategies, then they take turns assuming the role of the teacher and leading a dialogue about what's been said. Think alouds. Now, think alouds are like eavesdropping on someone else's thinking. With his strategy, teachers verbalize aloud while reading a selection orally. So it's taking students through what's in your mind as you're reading and modeling what you would want students to do as they read. And it would describe things they're doing as they read, as they monitor their own comprehension, and where, if they run into a problem, how do they deal with that? So the purpose of a think aloud strategy is to model for students how skilled readers construct meaning from a text. And questions that you may use or address in your think aloud is, what do I know about this topic? Or do I understand what I just read? What were the most important points in this reading? So this is what you would answer. You wouldn't necessarily ask these questions, but perhaps you do in your think aloud. Or how does this fit in with what I already know? At double entry, students keep an ongoing record of a notebook of learning as it occurs. They can write in their own language. As they record their thoughts, their feelings, their reactions to text excerpts or features, perhaps teacher-provided prompts, and/or their own questions, their own connections and areas of interest related to the text. And going into the after reading routines is our next segment, and I lost my sheet for that one, so I'm going to look over here. So these are used after a reading, and they help students analyze concepts for a deeper understanding of ideas and organizing information for later retrieval. Interaction with the passage becomes instantly apparent as students share connections, they share corrections, and reflections about the text or themselves as reader. So as you see the purpose, really the students are using a lot of thinking skills as they're organizing, clarifying, elaborating, synthesizing, and applying what they learned during the text. And then the strategies, they could be thinking about their own thinking using metacognitive stems, pluses, minuses, interesting facts. A 3-2-1, and a 3-2-1, there's so much you can do with the 3-2-1. 3 facts I've learned, 2 questions I have, 1 interesting point, but they can vary by teacher, by grade level. So very flexible, that routine, in working with that, what you ask students to produce as well. And that's where the metacognitive stems are wonderful, because it actually starts with the language. So you start perhaps with, one thing I learned today was, or something that was difficult for me was. So you're starting with the language, and then students would finish it. So they're not creating it completely on their own. And that works very well with students who may be at a lower proficiency level, giving very simple stems and then providing them ways to answer that using what they've learned. And our next slide is going back to the Wizard of Oz and looking at after reading routines here using a story scramble. And something like this could be perhaps where you have strips and then the students just move them around. And here done virtually, they could just drag and drop the key details from the text and putting them in order to create a summary of what they read. And our next slide. Another example of an after reading routine is the illustration review. And Melissa talked about how important illustrations are for ELLs who may not have the language, but they can comprehend a graphic or a picture that's used. So taking an illustration and asking questions directly about that. And those pictures are great for anticipation. They can clarify what was read. So just opens up a lot of opportunities for students to demonstrate their understanding. Another one is a vocabulary review, where they're taking the vocabulary, key vocabulary. It's not every single word there, but it's the key vocabulary, and then connecting that to the definitions that are in a different order. So again, that can be a connection, like a drag and drop, take the word accident and then drop it on the meaning for that. And it or you can take the pencil and they're actually drawing the line, whether it's printed or if they're using a text tool to make that connection. And this would be actually a really good opportunity to integrate Jamboard, which Melissa's going to be talking about that very shortly if you are tutoring remotely. And last thing I wanted to remind you is that as an AFT member, if you want to learn more about PD on this topic or other topics related to literacy and English language learners, we do want you to contact Lisa Dickinson at edickinson@aft.org. Melissa?
Thank you, Susan. There's a lot going on in the chat, so many great ideas, people giving different versions of the strategies and how they work with domain 1, students in level 1, students in level 4. So it's a lot of great information in the chat. Okay, so we are going to push another poll to you, and we're going to move to a little bit of a virtual portion of the tips strategies. And what we're looking for is just a quick, how comfortable are you with using Jamboard? Interested in this? It will help me determine the information that I share in the next slides with you. So from very comfortable, you use it all the time, to not comfortable, I have never used it before, which is perfectly fine. I saw your comment, Elizabeth. Okay, I'm going to add that one for people who have never even heard of it. Well, you will in a moment. Okay. Don't forget to answer in the poll just so that you can have those poll responses needed for attendance. Okay, so looks like we have quite a range, and my goal in the next few slides is to offer something for all of you. But please know, those of you who have never used it before or have never even heard of it, we have a resource document that has multiple links, step-by-step ways to get you through Jamboard. And we are going to look at Jamboard and how it pertains and how it can support literacy in particular, but Jamboard can really be used for so many different things. So because you will have access to these slides, once the recording is posted, and they're also in the resource document, I'm going to give you some very basic information, but please know you will be able to go dive a little bit deeper into this. But Jamboard is basically a digital interactive whiteboard, and it's really a great tool to use for collaboration. You can use it virtually, but you can also use it while you're in the classroom, and all that you need is a Google account, and a free Google account works perfectly. So Jamboard is a Google tool, and it's free. It's unlimited use. And if you have a Google account, you already have access to Jamboard. If you don't have a Google account, you can set up a free one to make the Jamboards. However, once you have created a Jamboard, if you want to share it and have people interact with it, they don't even need an account. They just need the link that you're going to share with them. Jamboard is great because it is something that can be viewed, but it is also something that can be collaborative and can be edited. And if you are familiar with Google at all, you know that your work is saved automatically, which is always a great tool. And it's a great resource because you can go back to your Jamboards after you work on them collaboratively and use them for study guides and resources, and it's a great tool. So a little bit more about Jamboard. What you see here is the option when you're using Jamboard. You can use text boxes to create and share information. You can use sticky notes to share ideas. What you can do with Jamboard is you can use a pen tool, you can draw on it, you can write on it. If you are one of the people who have said you haven't heard of it before, there are a lot of quick YouTube tutorials, less than 10 minutes, that will walk you through it step by step. Other things that can be done with Jamboard is you can insert images and GIFs or GIFs. We always go back and forth. How do we pronounce that? Which we know is something that is really beneficial, especially for our English language learners, to insert pictures or short GIFs so that students can see things in action. You can drag and drop images. You can see that it is a very limited toolbar on the left-hand side. There's not a lot of things that you need to worry about and figure out. Simple things from text boxes to add an image to quick little drawing tools. So this would be your whiteboard for those of you who are new to it. And then you can actually have multiple whiteboards by using this arrow up at the top. There are so many different things that you can do with Jamboard. You can think about some of those reading routines that we talked about, the before, during, and after, and you can take some of those routines like the storyboard, putting things in order, drag and drop things, and you could actually use it as an interactive whiteboard. For those of you who might be in classrooms, if you use Google Classroom, you can set up a Jamboard and you can have it so that every student has their own. You could also set it up so you are in charge of the Jamboard and students are submitting text, pictures, or graphics, and you're displaying it on your whiteboard or your smartboard, depending on what you have. So there are just so many different ways to use a Jamboard to embed that digital piece and the collaboration piece to any of those reading routines that we talked about prior. The other thing you can do with Jamboard, which is really a great piece, is something that we started using Jamboard when we went virtually here in Rhode Island, and then we really started to look, and there are so many creative ways that other teachers have used Jamboard. You can find pre-made templates, and again, we have links for those to those for you, but something like this example, the KWL chart. So you can have the KWL chart predetermined, set on a slide so that it's not editable. And then students are just using sticky notes and they are writing in their information. and then they are dropping their sticky note into the KWL chart. So there are a lot of things you can do with the Jamboard. You can keep it in view-only mode after students have collaborated so that they can use it as a resource, but that nothing is changed or edited. So I would really recommend that you take a deeper look at Jamboard if you haven't used it. And if you are using it, take a look at some of our links, because there may be some things that you haven't seen before. I know for myself, this slide here was something that I wasn't familiar with, but I had a colleague, and I've also seen others using Jamboard, where students were using this with assistive tools. They were able to draw. They were able to use a stylus. Some were able to draw on the screen. They were using the alphabet for drag and drop as letterboards to practice those foundational literacy skills. So there are so many ways that Jamboard has really evolved, particularly over the last year, that I would highly recommend that you look into it a little bit more. And I know my experience is with middle school students, and sometimes if I take a routine and make it digital, all of a sudden it seems brand new to them. They're automatically motivated, and I'm always trying to find something new for them. So these are just a few tips. And again, please know that you will have additional information and resources on this. Last slide about Google Jamboard is looking back at some of the ideas that we mentioned. You can create an image, then you can have students brainstorm around the image. They could do this individually. They could do it as a class or as a partner or as a small group. And then their classmates could go through the slides and see all of the different brainstorming. They could use it, as we mentioned, a vocabulary match, either to pre-teach or to support vocabulary. You could use images. They could drag and drop the images. So there's really countless ways to use Jamboard and to support literacy, foundational skills, and there's just a ton out there of free resources for you. And that's what I keep saying. Jamboard is great because it is free and really accessible to anyone who's able to get onto the internet. So I hope there were some tips there. I hope for those of you who have not heard of Jamboard before, you can start to look at it a little bit more in depth. There's a lot of different things that you can do. So Jamboard, think of it through the lens of literacy, and there are endless possibilities. So we have one more poll for you that we are going to push as we get ready to talk about our last resource, which is ReadWorks. So very simply, have you used ReadWorks before? Yes or no?
I was only introduced to it this past summer, and I could not get over the wealth of information that was on the website. I'm eager to see what our numbers are for that. And if you haven't downloaded the 2 sets of resources that we've shared, be sure to do that before the webinar ends.
We have about 75% who've submitted, so I'm going to close that poll. Look at that.
Wow, look how close that is. Interesting, interesting. Well, if you take one thing from today, if it wasn't Jamboard, if it wasn't all of our strategies, I hope you take ReadWorks with you. And if you've downloaded the resource, the blue and yellow one, you'll see at the bottom there is the direct link to ReadWorks. It is, what's that favorite word of ours, Melissa? Free. If it's free, it's for me. But it's not just free, it's a high quality resource that teachers can use with their students. It's just amazing what's there for teaching, or if you're doing tutoring. I mean, it's important to know that ReadWorks is a nonprofit organization. They will be asking for donations, and that's up to you if you choose to do so. But it's got a great partnership to support reading comprehension. And the resource library is just huge. It's got fiction, it's got nonfiction, and then there are activities. So based on which you choose of the passage, some passages have the interactive vocabulary supports, they have text-dependent question sets, they have teacher guidance. Now, not all of them do, so it's important as you look to see, based on your search, what you come up with. Now, not only is this good for teachers, but parents can sign up for a free account as well. So if you're working with parents, that's a great way to have parents support you at home working with their students as well, so they can access it there as well. Let's dig into this a little bit more and look at what happens when you do a search. And you can search by multiple filters, which is so wonderful. So it's not you're going in there and it's clunky, but I mean, you can narrow it down to content type, accompanying audio. Is there an audio with it? Or are those activities that I shared with you, perhaps you want some of those, you want the text-dependent question sets, maybe you want the interactive vocabulary supports. Grade level, so we know we have K-12 here with us. So perhaps you want secondary reading passages. What can you find? Perhaps you're looking on a very specific topic. This is what you're working with. What's available as a reading passage that I can use? Then you can go into, is it fiction you're looking for, nonfiction, or poetry? Perhaps you need to supplement what you're using. Maybe you have a lot of fictional passages, but you have no nonfiction. So that's a nice way to bring that in, or even poetry. And then the Lexile level, if you know the reading level of your student or students, then you can do that. So this is great for a tutoring situation or a small group, or something that you can choose for a full class based on that. So great way to search. Also wonderful if you're specifically searching for ELLs. So there is a built-in search feature to find an article a day collection that works with ELLs. They are scaled to students' independent reading level. So it's not too challenging. You want to get that, you want to get close to that where they're growing a little bit, but you don't want to overwhelm them and make it too difficult that they just give up. And the collections for ELLs do focus on very concrete topics and making it a better chance that they're familiar with that. And then, of course, we know to use illustrations to back that up. And if you select the Appreciating Diversity filter, but beneath that special collections, then you can browse passages that are looking at a variety of cultures. So if you have certain cultures that are represented in your classroom, that way you can really tailor it for those students. And those article a day sets are grouped topically to systematically build vocabulary. And those passages are really designed to build reading stamina, background knowledge, vocabulary. I mean, that's everything we're looking to do, isn't it? Here, I just wanted to introduce the passage components in the order the arrows appear. So starting, because I am left-handed, so starting on your left, accessing saved passages. So you can save passages and go back to them. I can't tell you how many times you find something and then you leave the site and then you have to go back and find it again. Well, you can save it, which is great. And then it shows you the passage features, comprehension activities, the audio reading with speed settings, passage with interactive vocabulary. It shows how you can easily save it to your list on that top right. So once you find it, boom, you save it. It shows you the different features of the passage. So maybe you searched for a topic, but what will come up, it will give you the information of the grade level, the word count, the Lexile level, and the text type. And so you can make sure that's a good match. It also identifies a vocabulary list of the words that you would want to work or perhaps pre-teach students or make sure they understand so they can as they're working with that text, it's more comprehensible to them. And it also applies to standards. Now, when you are working with vocabulary, you can use Wordsmith to help out with vocabulary to make sure students are comprehending that. But with that audio reading, I love the idea that you can have the speed slower or faster, depending on the proficiency levels of your students. Isn't that amazing? I mean, I just love that. And then some additional ReadWork supports. So there's a first student activity where the students self-assess familiarity with the selected vocabulary words before they read. Then there's a second student activity, and that support varies by passage. So the word builder activity helps students practice combining syllables to form words. In the foundational reading skills, they learn identification, manipulation, phonics, decoding. So it's just nice ways to get students to interact. They can drag and drop. And as they self-assess, then they can see before they start how much they understand. Then they practice, so they're applying the information. And it's important to know that all the text on the page is accompanied by that audio recording. Again, remember, you can have it played faster or slower for students. And it also gives them the chance to hear it read aloud to them. So that's nice to model it for them. If you're not working with them reading it out loud, they can have it read to them. And Melissa, back to you. But wait, there's more.
So as we close out this evening, and again, we just are so grateful for all of the great shares in the chat. There's just so much information there as well. We wanted to leave you with a few additional resources. And I do know that in the chat, some people are asking about how do I access the resources. So it is available there through Share My Lesson in the platform. And I do know that once this is recorded and it's up in Share My Lesson, the resources will be connected with that as well. So you'll have a couple of different ways to access those if you haven't done so already. So we wanted to close out this evening by talking to you about some research, some additional resources on literacy and engaging our English language learners. So this report on promoting the educational success of children and youth learning English has a lot of information for our students, a lot about developing literacy among our English learners. If you're looking about the research or the findings, talking about phonemic awareness, explicit instruction on these things, along with phonics and oral reading fluency, vocabulary, just everything that has to do with literacy. We have a link to this that is something you can look at, which was a study from 2017. Another resource that we want to make sure that you're aware of is an article that was in the American Educator, which is an AFT magazine called Educating English Learners, a review of the latest research by Dr. Diane August. A lot of information in there, the 7 principles of English language learners that goes into depth. So if that's something that you're interested in, we wanted to give you a variety of resources and tips, but also the research behind them. And we also wanted to talk to you about Colorín Colorado. If you have not used this resource, please log on to this. We've given you a link to it in our resources. But also, we actually have an entire resource document just from this site that was created to really support all of the content that we shared with you this evening. Colorín Colorado has resources for teachers, for students, for families, multiple languages. I can't say enough about it. So if you have not checked that out yet, please take the time to do that. And then finally, we wanted to talk to you about another article in American Educator that was Teaching Reading is Rocket Science by Louisa Moats. There's a lot of information in there about the brain research on literacy and really what's happening in our brains. So it's a great companion to any of the tips and resources that we've talked about this evening. With that being said, we have just maybe a minute or so. I will let the moderators let us know if we have any time at all for questions and comments. If we do, we would be happy to take those. But before we do that, we just wanted to make sure that you are aware of the upcoming webinars that really go along with this on February 3rd and April 14th. So we'll keep that on the screen and answer some questions if we have time or if we have any.
Great, thank you. Questions down there. Do we have time or no?
We have time for, we'll take a couple of questions that were in here. And I'm sorry, my colleague Emily, who kicked us off, lost her internet. So I hopped on. So I'm playing the role as Emily to close us out today. And we've had a couple of requests for people to be able to submit their poll answers. They may have missed it earlier. So as I ask the first question, I'll push a couple of the poll questions for you. Okay, here's one question. You've shared a lot of information and I'm still taking it all in. I'm a new teacher. Where do you suggest I start with my student?
I'll take that one. That's a great question too, because and it's wonderful to have new educators joining us here. And we know that we gave a lot of information and we do have resources we hope to take with you. But with English learners and actually all students, you always want to start with getting to know your students. You want to build that connection, that relationship, that teacher-student connection that's going to open the doors for their learning. Because as they're comfortable, then they'll trust and they'll take risks, and then that's where they'll grow and learn. So find out about students' past educational experiences, their first language, and their culture, so you can build on what your students already know and help them make connections to that with their home language as well as English. And the resource that you have on Colorín Colorado, particularly under teaching ELLs on the website, that's colorincolorado.org. Yes, or no, .com. So teaching ELLs and new to teaching, you'll find a plethora of information.
All right, terrific. This is one quick question. Somebody asked, is ReadWorks free?
Indeed it is.
Yes, it is.
And there's a link to that on the blue and yellow resource that you can download. And I hope that's your homework tonight. Please log in and sign up for an account. It is free.
Great. Okay, let's take one last one and then I'll let you guys close things out. I have students with limited formal schooling. How can I use these strategies to best accommodate their needs?
So I would go back to what Susan had said as well, is number one, please get to know your students, find out about the languages that they speak, the literacy that they have already so that you can build on that. Getting to know the student is going to be your number one priority. It's really important to know what they're bringing. All of the celebrations and all of the funds of knowledge that they have, we want to tap into those first so that we can really have our students comfortable in an environment where they're ready to learn. Because we know a lot of brain science out there about if students are not feeling that they are in a safe environment, then we can't even get to the content. So once we've done that, then we know where to start with them. That way we can tap into their L1, depending on what they have for that. If it's oral language, if it's written language, their literacy skills. And we want to make sure we have high interest content for them. We don't want to take a high school student and give them, a reading that is not relevant to what they're doing. So we really want to be cognizant of who our students are to give them literacy, text and information that is going to be high interest to them. And again, you don't know that unless you know who they are. And tapping into those pieces. We're always using videos, we're using graphics, but don't forget to use what they're coming in with. Tap into that first and then go from there. I don't know if you want to add anything else, Susan?
Those were just, some great suggestions. And if people are not, we did use the acronym, and SIFE, SLIFE, SWIFE, any way you cut it, are students with inconsistent or interrupted formal education. And those are usually English learners who've attended school in the U.S. for less than 12 months and who are 2 or more years below grade level in literacy in their home language. And that's something, and I taught at the high school level, and that was the same thing. Students don't want to read baby books as they're acquiring language, but there are ways, there are adaptive materials that can be used that are interesting, that are pertinent to them, and at their literacy level. And that's where ReadWorks is so good with those passages, because you can identify the lexile level of the passage and match it with the student and make it something that's interesting, that's pertinent. And it's not just, the reading passage, but it's the questions that go along with it and the discussion that you're building. And that's where learning continues to happen. And that's where your before learning, your during learning, and your before reading, during reading, and after reading routines can really scaffold and make the whole activity better for students, that they really grow and learn from that.
And in closing, Susan, I just wanted to say, go back to Coloring Colorado again. Lots of information for our students who are either interrupted formal education or limited formal education. There's a lot of resources there as well.
Great idea.
Well, ladies, thank you so much, Melissa and Susan, for this great presentation. It was wonderful. Thank you for all of our participants who joined us today. We have more in the literacy webinar series, as Melissa and Susan mentioned earlier. And if you haven't done that, you can register at sharemylesson.com/read. We've also showing how you can access your certificate right now. So assuming you've answered those poll questions, if you're having issues with any accessing that certificate, feel free to email webinars@sharemylesson.com and we will take care of you as soon as we can. And then also, we want to make sure that you save the date for our upcoming virtual conference, March 22nd to the 24th this year. And we're doing a pre-registration for the conference where you can win a pretty exciting wellness package. So do sign up for that wellness, for that package here and save the date. I will say we've been doing virtual conferences for many years, well before they became kind of the hip and popular thing to do. So hopefully you will join us for those conferences coming up, and we'll be making an announcement about our lineup of presenters pretty soon. All right, so finally, Melissa, Susan, any final words before we sign off for the evening? And thank you again so much. You guys are such gems, and for us at the AFT and all the work that you do in literacy.
I want to
thank you for joining us.
Go ahead, Melissa.
Go ahead, Susan.
All right, I'm going to jump in and say, make sure you sign up for the remaining sessions in this series. If you thought this was useful, just wait till you learn, find out what you learn in the other ones. So valuable. And Emily, how much do these webinars cost with Share My Lesson?
Free.
Free.
$0.
Yeah, just thank you for joining us this evening. We know how busy your days are, and to spend some time with us. And if you heard about things that you're already doing, tap into them again, have them show up in your classroom, and just keep on supporting those students. We thank you for that.